In this video, we'll be going over my 2021 trip to Dry Tortugas National Park. Well, we are back to Dry Tortugas. This was one of the first national parks we visited and the first to start off these adventures. I honestly didn't think I'd be back this soon, but I forgot how much I enjoyed this place. Our adventure was a 3-day trip over 28 February to 2 March in 2021. It's been 2 years since our last visit here, and there are a few things I forgot. For those that don't know, Dry Tortugas is home to Fort Jefferson, which is a small key island roughly 70 miles from Key West, and that's Florida. It's only accessible by ferry, seaplanes, and private charter. The ferry is the only option that allows you to camp on the island, so that must be reserved beforehand. For trip logistics, this trip was booked about 3 months in advance. Originally, we were shooting for the end of March. However, the initial rangers we spoke to mentioned there were no openings for a while. In fact, a lot of them were booked solid for a long time. The park was a bit busier than normal just because of the COVID and the restrictions with lockdowns, people wanting to escape and get away. Eventually, we found something at the end of February into the beginning of March. Someone canceled their trip and I took the spot, so it worked out. We decided to drive down a day earlier and spend time in Key West before we did the trip. Last time we did this trip, we pretty much did a straight drive after leaving Tampa at night and arriving in Key West in the morning and then boarding the boat that day. Doing that would cause lack of sleep and caused exhaustion, and I ended up sleeping when we got to the island and I missed the sunset. I didn't want to do that again, so we planned accordingly. Ended up staying in a nice place in Key West and explored some of the southernmost point. The thing I forgot about were the carts and wheelbarrows on the island to help transport your equipment from the ferry to the campground. Last time we were there, I didn't even know about those carts, so I packed for mobility so we can get from the boat to the campground. Reason being is the campsites are first come, first served basis, and I had an idea of where I wanted to pitch tent before we got there. So I was trying to do mobility on our side so we can select a spot. Initially planned to be quick, grab a shady spot, so I packed a ruck and another pack that we can move quickly with. The guidance on the webpage shows you what types of equipment you're allowed to bring and how much of it. For example, like coolers and plastic containers and bins. Again, it's on a ferry with other people and there needs to be a weight and space factor. I always thought people just carried or dragged their coolers from the ferry to their campsite. But again, I forgot about the wheelbarrows and carts when we were packing for this trip. However, Nikki reminded me that those carts were there and we didn't have to bring a ruck or any type of pack like that. In fact, we ended up packing a bin with all of our stuff in it. There were concerns about rodents, aka the rats on the island. Issues of them getting into people's food or their tents. So I brought my bear can to store all our food in. Additionally, at each campsite, there is a big tote which you can store your food in as well. Last time we were there, I forgot about camera batteries. So I didn't get any night photography done that I really wanted to do. So this time, I wasn't gonna forget. I brought batteries, spare batteries, more batteries, and all the fixing for my camera. Notes about the trip. So right off the bat, we completely lucked out. What I mean by that is, a few days prior before our trip, the ferry broke down, and it was down for a few days, almost a week. There were other visitors that were on the island that were stuck and they couldn't get back, and then folks that had planned for this trip and they couldn't even get out there, so their trips got canceled. Which is why they tell you to plan accordingly and bring extra food and water, so when you go out there at least you can be prepared. So when we got to the boat that morning, they had just fixed it less than 24 hours earlier, so talk about amazing luck. The second note I want to mention was just the amount of people that were on the island. Look, it's great that people want to come out here and see these magnificent parks and these public lands. I'm all for that, but man, after all these lockdowns, so many people were just itching to get out, and compared to the last time we were there in 2018, the numbers were staggering. Even the number of boats that were anchored offshore. When we were there in 2018, there was maybe 3 boats anchored out. And this time around, there was 18 boats. Now, it's great that more people are getting out there and seeing these places. I'm all for it, but with more people comes something that really bothers me. The trash and destruction of public lands. There was trash in the water, stuff blown in the wind, getting caught in the foliage. Look, I get it, things happen, but it just sucks seeing dead coral around the fortress, and that sunblock floating on the water like oil. Just made me mad seeing all this, it really did. Another issue I had is with one of the guests at the fort. One night we were walking around the moats, someone from their private yacht was taking their dinghy into the moat section. There are signs that clearly say no boats, no swimming, no motors, etc. But they were just putting away in that moat, endangering whatever species of animals were living in there. It's infuriating seeing these people disrespect these lands. On a different note, another thing I forgot about were all the hermit crabs. I forgot how many there were, and how they come out of the woodworks when you show up and start cooking anything. They are rather cute and fun to watch. So there are nesting seasons for some of the local birds and animals in the area, and sections of the keys are closed down for those seasons. Last time we were there in 2018, Long Key section was closed down due to nesting being a nesting ground. And this time around, Bush Key was closed because of the nesting section for the birds. Those birds are also loud at all times of the day and night. If you wake up in the middle of the night, you'd still hear them squawking. So bring earplugs if you don't like hearing noise while you try to sleep. Another note was just how fantastic the stars were. I tried my share of night photography, but after snapping quite a bit, it became clear that the frame on my camera was just a bit small and all my images were coming out grainy, and no matter how many I took. But that didn't stop us from enjoying the view. And I captured what I could, but the images just didn't do it justice. Additionally, some of the boats anchored offshore just created light pollution, so we couldn't see as clearly as we did several years back. Alright, lessons learned. So for my last trip, I forgot to bring sandals. I brought them this time. Walking around the moat, the sandy beaches, even the sections of the fort with greater comfort, so bring sandals. Another lesson learned is we brought a brush this time. We used the brush to brush off our feet or parts of our bodies or hands, so we wouldn't get sand in the tent, and man, it was a lifesaver. We barely got any sand in the tent. Another lesson learned is we are glad we took a multi-night trip opposed to just doing one night. That allowed us to take our time, do things on our own leisure, avoid some of the crowds when the tours showed up. The boats would generally show up around 10:40, and that includes the seaplanes, and departs around 2. And during that time frame, we can eat lunch, maybe take a nap, or hang out in the shade. That's another thing that I forgot about was the lack of shade. Minus some of the trees at the camping section, there's very little protection from the sun outside the fort. The fort has those hallways and those sections in the shade, and is naturally cool, which is a nice place to take a break from the heat. Another lessons learned, and I mentioned this last time, was maybe pitch tent in a different section of the campground. We pitched in a very similar area that we did last time, except this one had a little more airflow. It was kind of like in the middle. But with each campsite, there's give and take of what you're getting. If we camped on the other side, we definitely would have a lot more airflow, but there'd have been less privacy and then constant sun too, from sunrise to sunset. So there is give and take. We aimed on the side of a bit more privacy and just compromised with a little less breeze. There is one thing I wish we did. When we were at the port checking into the ferry, there were a few rangers that mentioned downloading a podcast before getting to the island. That way you can do your own private tour. There was no cell reception or any kind of infrastructure on the island, so they recommended downloading it then and there while you still had reception and before we set sail. I kind of wish that we tried that podcast out. However, we did our own self-tour. There's a bunch of plaques throughout the island, and we kind of just followed those and read those along the way. Might not have been the same thing with narration, but it worked for us. And lastly, another thing that we learned from the last trip is we brought our own little lawn/beach chairs. They were perfect for when you're sitting at the beach or hanging out at camp or even looking up in the stars. It's nice to not sit in the sand and have to get your towels all sandy and have to wipe yourself off. It's just like these little things that make the trip more enjoyable. Overall, this trip was great. It was really relaxing. It felt more like a vacation than it did an adventure. It always saddens me to be leaving this place after a few days. I try to enjoy the moments as they come, but they always go by so quickly. Again, I'd recommend this place and definitely spend multiple days there. It was so beautiful and so relaxing. But like always, thanks for watching and enjoy the trails.